You're with Alan Juddy, and this is another episode of Seed Dating, the podcast where you get to meet one of Agricom's forage products, learn about its attributes, and match it to your own farm system. And here to help nurture this new blossoming relationship is our very own forage relationship expert, Alistair Moorhead. Hi, Al, and who are we going to meet today?
Well, Juddy, today we're going to meet a tribute white clover, one of New Zealand's newest generations of white clover.
Well, I'm excited to learn about the attributes of a tribute.
It's a very impressive clover, Juddy.
Well, before we start, let's just jump back and talk generally about what white clover is and what job it does in a perennial pasture, for example.
Well, white clover is an essential part of the New Zealand grazing system, and people probably try to underplay the discussion of diversity in general and that we don't have really widely diverse pastures. But the reality is there is very, very few longer-lived pastures in New Zealand that don't have white clover in them as a peer to a grass species, any grass species. So it's never just grass, it's grass and white clover.
And I know we've done a podcast on white clover and really picked apart what that is, but give me your three kind of the key things that white clover brings to a perennial pasture.
Oh, it's really interesting because the primary one that is on everyone's mind in New Zealand at the moment, particularly around nitrogen caps, is nitrogen fixation and legumes providing nitrogen fixation. But ironically, I would still see that as the third place reason for using white clover in our pastures. And the very first is animal performance. And so for every percentage of dry matter that is white clover inside a grass pasture or a pasture, you can get a response from both a dairy cow, a beef animal, or a sheep. And the lambs, particularly lamb growth rates, that you can pick up 20, 30 gram differences on percentages of clover that you and I couldn't tell by eye different, and yet you could pick up a 20 to 30 gram a day difference. So they're very sensitive to small differences in clover content. When it comes to dairy cows, some of the work from the early 2000s highlighted that a dairy cow will get a milk-solids response right up to 60% of its diet being white clover. And so it's not quite linear. I think it's tailing off at 60%, but the point is it's an increased milk-solid output for every percentage of clover, probably leveling out in the 40s to 60s, but still increasing. People would freak out over that because there's also the risk of bloat at those high levels. But the point is you get responses in the vat for the presence of clover. So that's the first point. The second point is actually, ironically, just as valuable, but probably not acknowledged as much. But having good clover in your pastures improves pasture management. It means your average grazing residuals are hit much more consistently. You tend to find your paddocks that you mismanage both in sheep and beef and or dairy are pastures that are mostly grass-based because your clover contents are low, and that requires more management all around. And so as clover content increases, you tend to find your ability to hit your residuals, graze pastures uniformly is so much greater. So they are my two major points. Then the third one again is this natural relationship it has with rhizobia in the soil, creating nodules, capturing atmospheric nitrogen and converting that into plant available nitrogen and naturally boosting the nitrogen cycle in a grassland.
Great summary of white clover. So what makes, when we're talking about the different cultivars of white clover, what really makes a tribute stand out?
Well, a tribute is such an important white clover from a New Zealand Inc. perspective. Its story goes back to grasslands clover breeding in the late 80s and 90s when a really strong variety was created called Sustain. And there is a linkage. So white clover spreads out on stolons. These are storage organs that can throw that spread across the ground, running away from its primary taproot where its seed was planted, and it keeps colonizing all out throughout all the spaces of pasture. And from each of these stolons and the nodes on the stolons, they can produce a flower a leaf and a future root and a future stolon, and they can branch and carry on out. What we tend to find across white clover genetics is that the thinner the stolon, the smaller the leaf, the more tolerant to hard and set stock grazing environments and just tough environments, full stop. And the bigger, bolder stolons tend to be associated with being competitive and aggressive grass pastures and more upright leaf production, and just more aggressive, to be fair, in amongst grass. And so these two traits are embedded in their genetic diversity of white. And what happened with the emergence of sustain, it was a clover that first started to break a relationship between leaf size and stolon density. And it mapped out beautifully on the lines of stolon counts to leaf size and showed a step out from the existing old genetics. And so sustain became one of the single most popular clovers in the 90s, and grassland sustain, and early 2000s. And then technically that market transferred into its successor, which was Tribute, in the early to mid 2000s, and that became one of New Zealand's just largest selling clover. It was a jack of all trades and went into all sorts of pasture mixes. And so here we are in that third generation of this style, where we have valued this intense stoloniferous behavior, where you've got lots of stolon activity and you are carrying quite a large leaf size. And it's from that point that you start the description of what is a tribute in my eyes.
Yeah. So tell me, again, what sets that apart from some of its predecessors?
Well, as I just described, we saw tribute as the jack of all trades. And that means you've got to be able to put it in a pasture, maybe with other clovers that are smaller in leaf or bigger, and it will be the central clover for virtually any pasture mix. It will be able to tolerate tough grazing, tough years, and in that moment it will get smaller in the leaf size and it will be functional like a smaller leaf type. Likewise, you can put it into high performance pastures. So the big thing that we've now identified after we've done the work to prove that a tribute is our candidate and it's our natural successor was that a tribute appears to do the set stocking much better than tribute ever did, while still performing in really high performance pastures and high pasture cover that you experience in dairy farming and intensive beef systems. So a tribute just does actually all its jobs better and significantly better when it comes to set stocking. So if you can see a golf ball in a paddock for 2 months of the year, possibly 3, a tribute can actually morph down or become plastic enough, using that word, that it can actually survive, be smaller, and be really small at times. But in the good moments, when you're making silage and the pasture's at 3,000 kilograms of dry matter or greater, it's right up in the canopy. It's got a leaf half the size of the palm of your hand, and it's really contributing to yield at that point as well.
So I guess what you're saying is it's kind of it's something that can kind of move and morph into, depending on its environment, into the clover that would be most successful.
Correct.
So under those harder grazings, it's more like a smaller leaf type, as you say.
And more importantly, you can do that with confidence with a tribute. So it really is an improvement for those tougher times.
Yeah, so it actually does that really, really well, as well as putting in a smaller leaf clover, for example.
Correct.
And I like the idea that that same plant, you shut that up for silage, and then it can very quickly turn itself into essentially what is a medium to larger leaf under the circumstances.
Absolutely, with great density. I think the thing I've seen also with it as a plant is that in the past I've also had this philosophy of definitely mixing our clovers. But the reality with a tribute is that when you look at it in a layer, you tend to find that the big leaf types have a layer of tall leaves, and the small types have a horizontal layer of small and medium-sized leaves. With a tribute, you have a layer of quite large leaves, and then another layer underneath it naturally of smaller leaves. And so you've got this double tier of leaves within the same variety, within the same canopy, which gives you a real depth to that grazing dynamic where, the animal's going in and pushing right into the sward, and it can actually access a deeper deeper canopy of legume leaf.
So I guess in this, and you've probably in that answered another question in terms of the farm systems. If you're thinking about some sheep operations who might be set stocking for periods, you're looking for dairy farms or even intensive finishing farms. I guess all of those systems where something like a tribute would work really well.
Yeah, the way I'm looking at it at this moment is probably it would fit into 85% of your pasture options as the heart and soul of your clover choice. So a tribute really sits as that flagship choice that you put on their first pick on your paper as you design a mix. And then you just think about your business to exactly what else you might be wanting and go for the bigs, put a brace in there if you want to compete in a hybrid ryegrass pasture or hit an emblem up if you're actually seeing a golf ball for more than 3 months of the year and put the medium small types in there for that job. But at the end of the day, you'll probably be putting a tribute on the paper first in every pasture mix.
Let's just unpick that for just a little moment. Can you think of a situation where you wouldn't put it in?
Yes, probably. I think I would be very comfortable not putting in short rotation ryegrass pastures where you're picking a legume to compete with a Manta diploid Italian or a Mohawker hybrid ryegrass. I definitely do think that the larger leaf types for the time they're in the ground is probably really appropriate. Outside that though, if you think that Mohawk is going to go for more than 3 years, a tribute would still be worth putting in.
Absolutely. Well, ding, I think we've come to the end of this date. It seems that we could attribute a lot of the production of a pasture to its clover content, especially if that clover's got the attributes of a tribute.
Attributes all over the place, Juddy, just like a good pasture.
Well, today I'm identifying as a finisher and recognise that clover is a critical component for driving production, and I like the attributes of a tribute, so I'll be swiping right. You've been listening to another episode of Seed Dating with Al and Juddy. Hope you can catch another episode real soon.